Have you ever wondered what happens when firefighters arrive at a fire, but there are no flames? What if the smoke you see isn't coming from a fire, but from something that should never have existed? What would you do if you discovered that the burning building had already burned down completely 30 years ago? Is there anything worse than dying in a fire? Yes, there is something much worse. And I discovered that on that stormy night, my name is Captain Marcus Torres. I'm 42 years old, and I've been in command of Fire Station 7 for almost a decade. I've seen it all in this profession. People burned alive, children we couldn't save in time, buildings collapsing on my men. I thought nothing could scare me anymore. I was wrong. This happened 3 weeks ago on a Friday night, the kind of night that makes you want to stay home, under the covers, praying that the phone doesn't ring. A massive storm had been predicted to hit our region, and when I say massive, I'm not exaggerating. Meteorologists warned of winds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, torrential rain, and the possibility of tornadoes. At exactly 11:47 p.m., I received the call that would change everything. The 911 dispatcher, a woman named Sarah with whom I've worked for years, was visibly shaken. Her voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. She said she'd just received an emergency call about a fire on a property on the outskirts of town. The address she gave me sent shivers down my spine. It was the old Riverside Industrial Facility. Every firefighter in the region knows this place. In 1994, there was a catastrophic fire there. 37 workers burned to death. The building was completely destroyed. The ruins remained untouched for years until the city finally ordered everything demolished in 2003. There was nothing there, just an empty lot surrounded by chains and condemned property signs. I asked Sarah if she was sure of the address. She confirmed it. She said the person who called was frantic, shouting that there was a fire and people trapped. The call dropped before they could get more information. When they tried to call back, the number was out of service. Something wasn't right, but a calling is a calling. We can't ignore it. I mobilized my team. That night, there were 7 of us, me, my Lieutenant James Richardson, and 5 experienced firefighters, Michael, David, Roberto, Tom, and the youngest, Tyler, only 6 months old. The storm was already beginning when we left the station. The first heavy drops hammered against the roof of the truck as we sped through the deserted streets. The drive to the Riverside property would normally take about 20 minutes. That night, it took almost 40. The rain was so intense that the windshield wipers, even at maximum speed, could barely clean the glass. Lightning flashed across the sky every few seconds, briefly illuminating the surrounding landscape before plunging us back into near total darkness. As we drove away from the city, the roads became increasingly deserted. Empty fields stretched out in every direction. There were no houses, no lights, just the raging storm and us. It was Michael who saw it first. He was in the passenger seat next to me and suddenly pointed through the windshield, yelling for me to look. In the distance, through the curtain of rain, there was a reddish-orange glow cutting through the darkness. Fire, a big fire, but that was impossible. There was nothing there to burn. I accelerated as much as I could safely. My heart was pounding, not just from the normal adrenaline rush of responding to a call, but from a growing sense that something was profoundly wrong. Everyone in the truck felt it. No one was speaking. We just watched that impossible glow getting closer and closer. When we finally arrived at the property gate, what we saw made no sense. There, exactly where there should have been only an empty lot, stood a huge industrial building in flames. Enormous flames licked the windows of the second floor. Thick, black smoke spiraled upwards, mingling with the storm clouds. The heat was intense enough to be felt even from inside the truck and through the torrential rain. But that was impossible. That building didn't exist. It had been demolished more than 20 years ago. James looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. He's a veteran with 25 years of service. He's seen practically everything. But in that moment, I saw pure fear in his eyes. Real fear. We didn't have time to process the impossible. There was a building on fire, and if the 911 call was correct, there were people inside. I ordered the team to get ready while I radioed our arrival to dispatch. We jumped out of the truck and straight into the storm. The rain was so heavy, we were soaked in seconds. The wind nearly knocked me over when I jumped from the vehicle. We had to shout to communicate over the roar of the storm and the crackling of the flames. The property gate was open. The chains that should have been there, locking everything up, simply weren't there. It was as if they had never been there. We moved towards the building, and the closer we got, the more impossible details were revealed. The structure was identical to the photographic records I had seen of the original building. The same industrial architecture from the 1980s. The same windows, the same layout. It was as if they had rebuilt the place exactly as it was before the 1994 fire. But nobody had rebuilt anything. I knew that. Everyone knew that. The flames were mainly coming from the second floor, where the old offices were located. The ground floor, where the factory floor was, also showed signs of fire, but less intense. Smoke escaped from all the openings. The heat was overwhelming. Even with the rain trying to extinguish the external flames, we quickly established our strategy. David and Roberto would stay outside managing the hoses. Tom and Tyler would do the initial perimeter reconnaissance. Michael, James, and I would go in for search and rescue. The protocol is clear. In fires with potential victims, search and rescue takes priority over firefighting. If there were people inside, we needed to find them quickly. We put on our self-contained breathing apparatus. The smoke was already so thick that without it, we would have died in minutes. I tested my mask, checked my flashlight and axe, and advanced toward the main entrance, with James and Michael close behind. The front door was partially open. When I pushed it all the way open, the heat that escaped felt like a physical wall. But we moved forward. We always move forward. The interior was hell, literally. Flames shot up the walls. The ceiling was beginning to collapse in places. Metal beams groaned in the extreme heat. Debris was constantly falling around us. Visibility was almost zero, even with our high-powered flashlights. I shouted through the loudspeakers in our masks, calling for survivors. My voice echoed strangely in that space, but there was no answer. Only the roar of the fire and the sound of things collapsing. We divided the ground floor into sectors and began the systematic search. I took the east sector. James went to the west. Michael stayed in the center, maintaining communication with both of them. The eastern section appeared to be a storage area. There were metal shelves twisted by the heat, charred crates, melted equipment, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The objects weren't just burned, they looked old, covered in dust and rust under the soot, as if they'd been there for decades, not days or weeks. I saw calendars on the walls, completely charred, but I could still make out the year on one of them, 1994. That didn't make sense. If this building had been rebuilt, why were there calendars from 1994? Why did everything look so old? I kept moving forward, checking every corner, every closet, every space where someone might be hiding or trapped. And that's when I found the first door, a heavy metal door that led to a staircase. The sign next to it, half melted, read, "Second floor, administrative." I reported my location by radio and said I was going upstairs. James replied that he had also found a ladder in his sector and was doing the same. Michael would remain on the ground floor as a coordination point. The staircase was narrow and the smoke there was even worse. Each step was a battle. The heat intensified as I climbed. You could feel it through my equipment. The metal of the handrails was so hot that I had to wear my thick gloves to avoid getting burned. I got to the second floor, and what I saw made me stop completely. The hallway ahead of me was on fire, but through the flames and smoke, I could see doors. Lots of doors, office doors. and in some of them, through the broken glass windows, I saw movement, shadows, moving shadows. My training took over. I shouted, announcing my presence, identifying myself as a firefighter, asking anyone who was there to respond. And then I heard it. Voices. Multiple muffled voices coming from different directions. People screaming for help, calling for rescue, saying they were trapped. I immediately radioed that I had found victims and needed backup. James replied that he was almost on the second floor. Michael said he was calling David to come up as well. I chose the nearest door and smashed it down with my axe. The office on the other side was completely engulfed in flames and smoke. I swept the room with my flashlight, searching for the person I'd heard scream, and then I saw her, a figure in the corner, bent over, motionless. I waded through the hell of that office and reached her. It was a woman. She was wearing office clothes, a white blouse and a dark skirt. Her hair was burnt. Her skin was... God, her skin was horribly burned. I checked her pulse purely on instinct, but I already knew the answer. She was dead, probably for several minutes, judging by the signs. But that didn't explain how I had heard someone shout from that office less than a minute ago. I didn't have time to process it. There were more voices, other people still alive. It had to be. I left that office and went to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. In each one, I found the same thing. Bodies, always bodies. Men and women wearing 1990s office clothes, all dead, all terribly burned, and all positioned as if they had died trying to escape. But the voices didn't stop. They kept calling, shouting, begging for help. James reached the second floor and reported the same thing. Bodies, many bodies, but no living survivors. The voices were impossible. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold, even in that infernal heat. The bodies were not fresh. They were not recently decomposed. They were mummified, preserved in some impossible way, as if they had died a very, very long time ago. But something kept them there, exactly as they were at the moment of death. And then it all made sense. The most horrible sense possible. This wasn't a reconstructed building. This was the original building. The building that had burned down in 1994. The building that was never completely demolished. Not physically, but somehow, in some other way that I couldn't, that I didn't want to, understand. We were inside the 1994 fire, not a new fire. The original fire, trapped somehow between time, between reality and something else. The voices we heard were those of the 37 workers who died here, trapped eternally in the moment of their death, reliving their final terror endlessly. I radioed that we needed to leave. Immediately, my voice must have betrayed my panic because James didn't question it. He simply replied that he was on his way to the stairs, but things were getting worse. The building was beginning to structurally collapse, not in the normal way that burning buildings collapse, but in a strange way, as if it was simultaneously burning and dematerializing. Parts of the walls simply disappeared. Floors became translucent before vanishing completely. I ran towards the stairs, but when I got to where they should have been, there was nothing, just a dark hole leading down into the darkness. The stairs were gone, completely vanished, as if they had never existed. Real panic hit me then. We were trapped on the second floor of a building that was simultaneously burning and ceasing to exist, and the voices were getting louder, closer, more desperate. That's when I saw one of the shadows actually move. Not just through the smoke, but toward me, a human figure, burned, crawling down the corridor. Its eyes, God, its eyes were still open, still moving, even though the rest of its body was charred beyond recognition. She reached out a hand toward me, her mouth opened, and from those burnt lips came a single word, clear as crystal despite the impossibility: help. I ran. For the first time in my career, I simply ran. I didn't think, I didn't plan. I just ran in the opposite direction, desperately searching for any way out. I found a window, Without thinking twice, I used my axe to break the remaining glass and looked out. We were about 6 meters off the ground. Normally that would be much higher, but I had no choice. I yelled into the radio that I was jumping out of the east side window of the second floor. James replied that he would do the same from the west side. Michael was yelling from the ground floor, asking what was happening, why we were abandoning the search. I didn't have time to explain. I didn't have the words to explain. I jumped. The impact with the ground was brutal, even with the rain softening the earth. I felt something snap in my left ankle, but the adrenaline was so high that I barely registered the pain. I got up, limping, and started to walk away from the building. I saw James land on the other side, rolling from the impact. He also got up quickly, despite being visibly injured. Michael ran out the front door, along with David, who had come in to help. We all ran back to the truck through the storm, which now seemed almost comforting compared to what we had just experienced. When I looked back, expecting to see the building still on fire, what I saw was something I will never forget. The building was disappearing, literally dematerializing before our eyes. The flames flickered like a glitched image on TV. The entire building began to become translucent, and then, in a matter of seconds, it was simply gone. In its place, there was only the empty lot that should always have been there. Fallen fences, weeds. No sign that a building had ever stood there. No sign of fire, no smoke, nothing. The only evidence that something had happened was us. 7 firefighters, soaked, covered in soot, some injured, all in complete shock. I tried to convey it to the dispatcher, but the words wouldn't come out. How could I explain this? How could I make anyone believe me? It was Tyler, the rookie, who found the words first. He simply said on the radio that the fire was under control and there were no victims at the scene. A false alarm, a communication error. It wasn't true, but it was the only thing that made sense to report. The alternative was to admit that we had responded to a call for a building that hasn't existed for decades, that we had fought flames that burned 30 years ago, that we had seen the dead of an old fire eternally reliving their agony. No one would believe it. Perhaps not even we ourselves would believe it if we hadn't all been there, if we hadn't all seen the same impossible thing. We returned to the station in silence. The storm began to subside during the journey back. When we arrived, it was just raining normally. I wrote my official report describing a false alarm. Everyone else did the same. We went to the hospital to have our injuries checked. My ankle was sprained. James had 2 cracked ribs. David had a mild concussion. We all received treatment and were released, but the physical wounds will heal. What won't heal is what we saw, what we experienced. In recent days, I have been obsessively researching the 1994 fire. I discovered details I had never known before. The 37 workers died exactly as we found them. Some in offices, some in hallways, all trying to escape. Most were identified only by dental records, so severe were the burns. I also discovered that there have been strange reports over the years. People who swore they saw lights on the site at night. Others who claimed to have heard screams coming from that empty lot during storms. They were always dismissed as imagination, as urban legends. But now I know the truth. Those people are not at peace. The 37 who died in that fire are somehow trapped in that moment, eternally reliving their death. And under certain conditions, during heavy storms perhaps, when the barrier between what was and what is thinnest, they manifest themselves. The building manifests itself, and they call for help that will never come in time, because we can never arrive on time. We're always 30 years late. The most disturbing thing, 2 days after the incident, I received a call from the city records department. An elderly woman, clearly confused, said she was looking for information about her husband, who died in the Riverside facility fire in 1994. She said she'd received a strange call a few days earlier. A call from her husband's cell phone, a number that had been cancelled decades ago. When she answered, she only heard static, and through it, the distant sound of someone calling her name, her husband's voice, asking for help. The call dropped before she could answer. When she tried to call back, the number was out of service. She was calling various departments, trying to find out if anyone knew anything, if there was any explanation. I didn't say anything. What could I say? But that made me realize something. The call we got on 911, the night of the storm, the one that got us there, it came from inside the building. It came from someone who was there, trapped in that eternal moment of death, somehow managing to reach through time to ask for help. And we tried. God knows we tried. But there's no way to save someone who died 30 years ago. There's no way to put out a fire that's already burned out completely. There's no way to change the past. Since that night, every time a storm approaches, I feel a tightness in my chest. I stare at the phone, waiting for it to ring, waiting for another call to that impossible address, because I know it will happen again, maybe not to me, maybe to another team, on another stormy night, but it will happen. Those 37 souls are trapped there, eternally reliving their death, and occasionally managing to scream through time, begging for help that will never arrive in time. This is what keeps me awake at night. Not the fact that I've seen the impossible, not the trauma of being inside a phantom fire, but the knowledge that there are people, or what's left of them, trapped in an eternal loop of agony. And there's nothing I can do to save them. Nothing. I remain the fire chief of Station 7. I continue responding to calls. I continue saving lives. But a part of me stayed in that impossible building on that stormy night. And sometimes on the darkest and stormiest nights, when the wind howls and the rain hammers against the windows, I hear voices, 37 voices, calling from the past, begging for help. And I know I can do nothing but remember. Remember that death is not always the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of eternal suffering. Sometimes the dead do not rest. Sometimes they burn forever. If you've made it this far and this story sent chills down your spine, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We have an ebook with more terrifying stories based Find the link in the pinned description and tell me in the comments, do you believe there are places trapped in time, reliving past tragedies endlessly? Until next time, if you dare,